This is the Conscious Economics Podcast. Your co-hosts are two women who found themselves in careers on Bay Street, but decided that there was something missing. So here we are. I'm Rhiannon Roseland. I'm your co-host and the CEO of the Economic Club of Canada. I'm also the co-founder of Conscious Economics.
Hi, I'm Asil, the CEO of Conscious Economics and a financial therapist.
Now, we call ourselves economic healers, and that is a term that I'm sure nobody has heard before, but we really believe that if we want to heal our systems and create a more equitable society, it starts with actually healing our relationship with money and the economy.
When you join us on this podcast, you'll be exposed to courageous conversations that help us examine, heal, and redefine the relationship we have with money. Join us on this journey as we co-create the new economy together.
What's up, everyone? This is the Conscious Economics Podcast. I'm your host, Rhiannon.
And I'm your host, Asil, and we're here to talk to you about redefining work. Actually, I've been really anticipating this podcast tree because ever since this topic literally surfaced in our just one-on-one phone call the other day, I was like, this is a topic that not only you and I so much resonate with, both on a personal and professional level with the company and the culture we're trying to build. But I also recognize it being such a key theme and pattern, especially post-COVID and really moving into the work as we just recover from this pandemic.
Well, and I think that for myself, and I know for many of us, including you, we've been thinking about this redefinition of work for a while now.
Yes.
But I believe that the pandemic has just obviously brought everything to the surface. And now, whether we like it or not, work has already been redefined.
100%.
We're working in different ways. We're using different technologies. We're relating to work in a different way. And so today, I think we're just going to explore how that's sort of feeling for us as we navigate that. Obviously, want to know how that's feeling for you, and really envisioning and creatively imagining what could the future of work be if we could redefine work. What are the areas that need the most redefinition? And so maybe that's a good place to start. Well, you always start us off, so you tell me.
I do have some historical context to provide, and then we can get into the discussion of how these theories potentially show up on a practical level in our lives, but also what we can do about it. And because first it has to be a personal journey before we always believe that personal transformation leads to collective transformation.
Yes.
So we personally need to redefine what work means to us first before we expect these systemic changes. But let's go through history lane and understand how the 9-to-5 even came about. So originally it started with Ford Motor Company. So Ford, who started the 9-to-5 in the 1920s. And actually, which was ironic to me, it actually started to curb the exploitation of factory workers because people at that time were actually working longer hours. And the 9-to-5 started as a way to help minimize so people not only were working 10 or 12 hours a day, but they were also working 6 days a week.
Yes.
So the Monday to Friday 9-to-5 was a movement towards minimizing exploitation of workers and actually starting to demand worker protection and rights and things like that, which is in itself ironic because I thought before I came across this fact that it was really the introduction of these concepts that started expanding the amount of hours we work, but it wasn't the case. But what happened actually around that time, and the reason this concept started to become standard is because it started in a factory, but it became standard across the workforce is because of law firms. And I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
And here's how it happened. So essentially in the 1950s, lawyers started realizing that they're getting paid less than doctors. And it just didn't make sense for their egos.
Oh, dear. Oh,
God forbid.
dear. We hurt the ego.
We hurt the egos of our lawyers because their pay grade was failing to match those of the doctors, like literally word for word.
Okay.
So what they did in 1958...
That is an interesting debate. We won't get into that right now. But should a lawyer be the same as a doctor? I don't know.
That's absolutely separate.
I'm not talking about
We should actually have another podcast on like the different professions and this whole social contrast on the prestige of
Of
that
just,
profession.
well, yeah, pay equity and
Pay
these
equity,
kinds of things.
absolutely,
Yeah,
and
for
like
sure.
the value creation behind these jobs.
Absolutely.
Side note, we drifted a bit, but let's go back to it. So basically, attorneys were paid a fixed fee originally for their service, and they weren't getting enough money in exchange of the time they spent working with clients. So the concept of billable hours came about, and that helped and enabled lawyers to start making more money from every single minute they spend with their client.
Well, and all hours are billable for lawyers.
Every second is billable.
I know. Yes.
So basically, because of that, the law firms quickly started realizing that they can make so much more money by making their employees work longer hours. So even though the 9 to 5 was like a standardized term, now there's an expectation that you're coming earlier than 9 and you're staying beyond 5.
Yeah.
So you can like squeeze every penny, because this correlation was built that time is money. And the time is money concept started in the law firm, the way law firms are compensated, which we obviously agree time is money, but the way we perceive it is almost the other angle, where it's like, but it's also freedom, and we need balance and all these different key concepts that in a way we're disintegrated when this concept started just equating profit.
Well, it's so interesting because when we look at any sort, so it's obviously rooting back into Ford Motor Company and this idea of factory workers and this idea of, you know, using the human body as a machine on the assembly line. And so asking human bodies to do very repetitive tasks sort of over and over again, you know, punch in, punch out. And it's this whole sort of standardization process of the labor force that I believe over time leads to this dehumanization of the labor force, where we start to see people as just a means to an end, an asset to get to the next place, to the next dollar. And we've lost that sort of humanity. And then when we think about this idea that, you know, we've been indoctrinated that we should go to more and more school and get more and more education so that we don't have to work with our hands, we can work with our minds. But what I've seen in, you know, when we start to look at, let's come out of the factory and look at a white collar worker in an ivory tower, you know, on Bay Street. And we always say Bay Street, and I don't want to just, you know, pick out Bay Street. But when you see people that are working in these corporate environments, there's this sense or this essence like this is better work, or that this work is
prestigious.
Yeah, more prestigious. And yes, there's usually the pay is different, but I've seen a lot of this mass standardization, industrialization within the corporation and white collar workforce as well, where people still feel like just another peg in the wheel. And I think that, you know, the pandemic, obviously we've had mental health, we've lost loved ones, we've been isolated from each other. But now as we transition back into going into the labor force, that lack of humanity, it's pressing on our hearts much deeper than I think it's ever before. And a lot of people are saying, if I'm going to really think about work as a time when I'm actually going out and potentially risking my life just to get there, or I really start to understand, because I've spent more time with my family now, how much I'm missing as I go in. And this is, I think, a lot of the plight for many women and mothers right now is like, what is it going to be worth for me to go in there? And it's not that we don't want to cultivate and create and produce, because many of us do, but it's gotta, you know, there has to be some kind of a change or a balance. And this is what we really talk about at Conscious Economics, is what are some of the other currencies that we can remunerate our labor force with? And I really think that, you know, wellness and well-being, and that's not just like eating an apple and like having a yoga mat over in the corner. It's like, does somebody actually care about the essence of who I am? And can I use my creative life force energy in this space? And these are the questions that I think that, you know, this is not just for a, oh, we're a, you know, startup, artsy, you know, young millennial
Wackos,
company. Yeah. Although we are. But, you know, this
Full
is starting
disclosure.
to bleed into, you know, the major, I'm seeing reports from, you know, the major consulting firms, Deloitte and PwC, and, you know, the future of work is rolling off of everyone's tongues right now.
Yes.
So people do want to re-envision and reimagine. Hold that thought. We have a quick word from our partners before going back to the episode. This podcast is brought to you by our sponsor, RBC InvestEase. Backed by expert human advisors, RBC InvestEase is a smart, online, automated investment service that allows you to invest with low effort and low cost.
Open your first RBC InvestEase account and pay no management fees for your first year. Plus, start investing with as little as $100. Simply visit rbcinvestease.com/getinvesting and sign up using promo code AA407.
And now, back to the episode.
There's a few things I want to mention because you mentioned Deloitte. There's actually a released article about the future of work from Deloitte that I came across recently that suggested that the first biggest asset that we had when the concept of work was created was really like labor, so working with our hands.
Yes.
And eventually with the Industrial Revolution, that was even more so the currency. And then when technology came about, we transitioned from hands to minds.
Yes.
And it became really the focus of intellect.
Yes.
And the future of work is going to be going back into our heart.
Yes.
So from hands to mind to heart.
Yes.
And now it's all about emotional intelligence, about connecting with others, especially with the expansion of technology and artificial intelligence. Our innate ability as a human to understand emotion and to really connect on that human level is going to be super profound.
Well, and that's exactly what I've been sort of saying for the last couple of years, that right now, if we really think about the future of work in that way, that it's going to be led from this heart space and a heart-centered approach to the way that we organize, the way that we create, the way that we relate to one another. We need a lot of practice.
Oh, 100%.
Because our society has been so blocked from using this, especially in the place of work. Typically when we come into a space of work, and you can see it even in the design of the clothing, the boxy sort of, structured, closed, I have to suck it in. I have to stand a certain way. I have to present a certain way. And it's all very, when we think about just the neuroscience of it and the psychology of it, it's a closing that we're doing. So how do we sort of open in these spaces of work and open that part of ourselves? That's a really interesting transition. And that's why we think mindfulness is such a big part of this workforce revolution, is to start to come back into our bodies as opposed to just only being up here.
And let's really break it down for you when we say that, so that you can just understand a glimpse of what we mean to infuse mindfulness in the work that we do. So, for example, we recently shot a whole bunch of modules for Mindfulness and Money, which is an episode we released earlier this month and talked about it. And prior to every single module, we actually went through a meditation together collectively. The crew that was helping us with the production, the individuals that were here to teach the modules, also ourselves being executive producers for this module. So all the people came together in a circle, meditated, connected with our higher self, thought about the clients and the participants who are going to go through this experience, and thought about the user, and really connected with all these, with ourselves, with the people involved at the work, and with the people receiving our work. And just that circle of connection was so profound. And it's just one of the different ways that we infuse mindfulness in our work, is we really integrate it.
And I know that, there's still this notion right now, and we still have so much in terms of belief systems and limiting beliefs around even what we're saying right now. I know that, they're depending on who's listening. Well, I think if you're listening, you're probably kind of into this. Yes. But for those that are, listening and thinking, well, this isn't really work, we've got to get things done. Like, we don't have time for this. I just want to paint a picture. Imagine a boardroom, and there's a group of executives around the table, and there's a very, very important issue that's happening within the company. It's leading to massive inability to retain labor force, competition kind of creeping up on whatever. It's a big problem. These board members are trying to make a decision. Now, typically, the way that we're all rolling around these days is we've got way too much on our plates. We're constantly overburdened with emails, this, and just information. In this information age, our bodies and our systems are flooded. We receive more information than our ancestors would receive in a lifetime in a day. And so what's happening is we can't actually access our clearest and most creative parts of ourselves when we are just on autopilot and sort of like our whole system's backed up. It's like if you had your computer screen open and you had 25 different programs running all at the same time, and you're trying to actually open another major file, you can't. It's slow. It's all backed up. You can't even see where it is. So what mindfulness really is if those leaders, those executives could take a moment and actually close down some of the files that are open in their operating system so they could have more power to focus on the issue that required their attention and come into the collective energy of who was around that table so they could lean on the power of the creative force that was around them, their colleagues, and sort of even just a few deep cleansing breaths and coming into a centered place and then approaching the work that way, it actually has an entirely different feel to it, an outcome to it. And if I was in that boardroom, I'd be like, I like this. Like, I like solving problems with these people. This is fun, as opposed to like, here's another thing and another thing. And that's sort of what, the modern day workforce has felt for me, kind of a slap in the face in a lot of ways. Like, here, just come out and get pummeled and then try and do everything else that you have to do. And that's for everyone. But in particular, I think, as a mom and as someone who's trying to be a good friend, trying to be a good partner, all of those things, it's like, there's just too many things.
Yes.
And there's too many things open on my computer screen.
So what you brought up is a really important point and a segue to the next thing I wanted to talk about. Because we talked, like, to summarize what we're saying so far, is the importance of introducing and integrating mindfulness within our work. It's really connecting with our heart space and having heart-centered approach to the work that we do. But what really also boils down to is the kind of we started with why 9 to 5 started to become a thing and how this elongated hour even became a structural norm, which is, honestly, if you look at the even salaried position, no one's actually working the 9 to 5. No one's working every single minute of that time frame. So employees, however, feel pressure to stay late just so that they can start showing their bosses and their other colleagues that they're extra hardworking, committed people. So in that sense, the irony of today's modern world workday is it really contradicts the original purpose to why this 9 to 5 hour window was created, because it was created to eradicate exploitation, and now the 9 to 5 is actually, if anything, furthering exploitation of our labor force. So we need to start thinking about it from that sense, because when we're talking about mindfulness and we're talking about heart-centered, does that mean that we have more flexibility to determine when we feel in the flow, and that could mean that we need a 2-hour lunch break today, or it means that we need half the day off, or it means that, I'm in the mood to work this Saturday, I'm in the mood to take a Tuesday off. Like, how does this show up as far as how we manage our time to ensure that we're always in that flow, that we're showing up not just as the best employees we can be, but also in the other parts of our lives that we need to attend to, being a mother, being a friend, being a daughter, all these other roles that we play. So what are your thoughts on that? Because that's also a very important thing to consider.
I think the flexibility piece is huge. Obviously, I want to acknowledge that there are certain roles or jobs where it is more of a shift work situation and it's harder to be able to embed that flexibility. Although with a shift work situation, you could come up with a unique way that you schedule people so there is more of that, what's the pacing that's right for you. But I think that's a huge, very perfect place to start. And I've always, in the way that I've run my companies over the years and the way that I've interacted with my staff family, is ensuring that people know that I'm going to treat you like an adult. You're an adult. You know what the items are that I need from you, or the company needs from you. And I trust that you know how to manage your time to be able to meet those expectations. And if you can't show up here, or you have something going on, as long as you can stay connected and be able to meet those deadlines, and if that's going to help you perform in a more creative way, show up better when you're here, that's great. But not everybody can handle that.
Yes.
And in particular, I've had a lot of issue where people actually want more bound and structure. They're like, what's going on? Like, and don't actually know how to find their own structuring and pacing within that. So one thing that I will say, when we talk about this hybrid model of work, one of the things that we all have to do, and this is the same with the mindfulness thing, we got to learn what that means to do it.
Yeah.
So we don't just open it all up and say, well, now everyone's going to figure it out. We need to find new ways of being able to cultivate that self-pacing, that time management, because we've been used to, I'm really productive when I go in and I sit under the fluorescent lights and like Bob, the boss, is right over in the corner. I know how to do that. I know how to be on my leash essentially and like be good here and do what I need to do. But if I come out, what will that be?
I would feel lost. And actually that's interesting, because one of the things we were exploring in our conversation, I was sharing with you how sometimes I feel guilty if I felt that my productivity that day was hindered. Then there's like this shame and guilt that arises. It's as if the expectation, especially for people who are ambitious and high performers normally, who have a corporate, background like myself, I sometimes even feel guilty taking this extra hour I need on lunch, or really honoring the fact that I'm not feeling creative, so I shouldn't be working on creative projects today. Maybe I should do more mundane administrative tasks or whatnot. So there's this whole, like, that's another piece of mindfulness, is knowing where you're at depending on the tasks in hand, which tasks are going to be more productive for me to work on today. And obviously there's, aside from like the time management, working on the urgent ones first and eating your frog first and all these different time management and productivity skill sets, it does require being in tune with your emotions and really understanding yourself, which we're not used to asking these questions in the workforce, because when you have a specific work structure in a corporate environment, you're given these expectations versus coming up with them on your own.
Yeah. I heard recently, and I've heard this kind of being thrown around, actually really interestingly, when Barack Obama was running for president the first time around, and John McCain was running on the Republican side. The Economic Club hosted John McCain, and he was behind, he's obviously now passed away, but he was behind, and he was with a group of executives, and he was actually talking about a 4-day work week.
Yes.
And
you read my mind. I was going to mention that, because in Iceland, they ran that study, and it was very helpful.
And it was it did well in Iceland.
It did well. The productivity increased. People, actually, that was my next point. It's really funny you said that. Because I was just telling you, I was like, so where do we leave the audience with? Because I always like to have nuggets for takeaways.
Yes.
And one of the things I wanted to leave them with is it may show up very differently to how you change or incorporate the future of work in your own life, because that varies drastically depending on the profession you're in, the personality type you have, the type of expectation you're trusted with. And there's so many variables, so there's no cookie cutter approach to how the future of work should look like, but these are questions we should start entertaining. How do I as an individual want to approach work in such a way that makes me feel the most fulfilled, the most productive, without compromising other areas in my life? And I think this is the sweet spot.
And I also want to just end off with this. I don't want to ever insinuate that work is bad.
No,
I love work. and of course we love work, because we've created a space that we love. But you see, that is what the future of work, I think, is calling upon for senior leaders around the world right now, is how can you create a space that people actually want to come? They want to serve that mission. They want to be there. And, whether you're selling paper clips or whether you're, trying to solve poverty, there is a way to create an environment and cultivate a space where people feel united, people feel seen, people feel respected, and people want to give and receive back something. And that is the true nature of the conscious economy, when we can kind of be in that space where workers are lovingly offering their labor devotionally to create that piece that's going to bring that product or food onto the table. And I love you always think about things like this, like even when you are buying a coffee, you always think about the owners of the store and like how they're going to be able to cultivate something with their families, and just the way that you think about it in your mind. So this is a huge topic. We certainly couldn't cover it all today, but we hope we've sparked some interest in all of you, that you're starting to think about the future of work. How would you define work now, and how would you like to redefine it in the future? We'd love to hear your ideas, and follow along and check us out.
We hope this inspired a conversation for sure. And check us out at consciouseconomics.ca. Share with us your stories, your feedback, whatever this conversation leads to. We'd love to hear from you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
This podcast is brought to you by CPP Investments. At CPP Investments, they never lose sight of the long term. They invest the Canadian Pension Plan Fund to help provide financial security for generations of Canadians.
They diversify the CPP fund across geographies and asset classes to access the best investment opportunities and generate sustainable long-term returns. The fund is now more than $400 billion.
To learn more about their investment performance for Canadians, visit cppinvestments.com.